How does a person answer why something happens?
When you look at the findings in different fields,
scant is the part of life in which we live.
To attain the highest values.
Do you have a sense going in how long that's going to take, or is that something that you have to kind of adapt to as you go forward?
So I generally will have a good idea, but there is also room for adaptation, right? I think that is one of the things that makes a great trial attorney too, is the ability to adjust on the fly. I love the quote from Mike Tyson, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. It's one of my favorites because so many trial attorneys have this great plan and then something goes wrong. And I will tell you right now, in jury trial, something will always go wrong, always. So if you aren't able to adjust on the fly, you will lose. And this is also somewhat related to this idea of understanding how to play people in the strategy game. You should have played almost every single situation out in your head before you ever walk into that courtroom, where you know exactly this could happen and that means I would need to respond this way. This could happen, I would respond this way. And you need to basically play out all these different routes so that when you're facing it in the moment, you can quickly respond and just take the action you need to take instead of stalling and freezing and losing all your momentum. And so there's so much when you're preparing for a trial, it is just a constant, like in your head, thinking through every possible situation that could happen. It's hard to explain a lot of times to say like my parents when they're like, well, it doesn't feel like you're always working that much because I'm not always like writing things out.
Yeah.
I'm not having to write out a closing argument, but I'm strategizing constantly. If I'm in preparation for trial for 3-4 months beforehand, it's almost all the time just in my head, just running. This could happen, this could happen, this could happen. Here's how I respond. Here's how they respond to that. Here's what happens then. Here's the A, B, and C choice from that point. And you're playing this game out so that when you actually walk into that trial room, you're ready to go.
So you mentioned twice now, I think at least, the importance of practice. And I've certainly seen that as well in your course. And I'm glad you did, because that's such a fundamental part of learning anything, right? And it's sometimes people are resistant to it because it's time and it's effort to do that. So let's go into a little bit more about what type of training you went through. And I want to start with that one. You talk about playing out these scenarios. Do you ever role play them actually with other people?
It depends. Sometimes, yes. It depends on the case. So sometimes I will work with friends that I know who are other lawyers, and we will actually strategize and game plan them out. Sometimes I'm just running all the calculations in my head.
Yeah.
But you have to just put in this time. You've got to practice. You've got to get prepared. And it takes a lot of hours. I mean, I tell people when I'm getting ready for a trial, I can create at this point in my career, I can create a great closing argument all on my own in one take. I could do it on the fly in the middle of trial because I've just done it so many times. Yeah. But a great closing is not what I'm going for. I'm going for an exceptional, an elite level. And in order to do that, that means I've got to workshop ideas with other people. And so I will just bombard my friends and family. I will ambush them when they're not ready and just start talking about things to see what resonates. Because what you'll start to see as you get better at being a trial lawyer is you start reading people and the cues they're giving you. So when I'm saying things, I can pick up on my mom or dad are responding this way. My friend is responding this way. Their body language is telling me they're engaged or they're not engaged. They perk up, like their eyebrows go up just a little bit. And I pick up on that subtle cue and say, oh, they're interested in this. These little things you pick up on. And so when I see something that's working, especially if I've identified that they're probably my target jury pool person, I'm storing that away and saying, this is something I need to make sure I bring in. And I'm always working with them too, to figure out, is what I'm saying confusing to them or not making sense? Because one thing that happens as both a trial lawyer and also with teaching this speaking course is I will know the case so well, or I know the subject matter so well that things make sense to me in my head because I've left out some steps.
Yeah.
because I know what those steps are in my head. And sometimes I have to present it to other people and they say, well, I don't understand how you got there.
Yeah.
And I have to realize, oh, I've got to walk them through it because they don't have everything that's in my head.
Yeah.
Same with teaching this speaking course, right? Some things that are second nature to me are not second nature to other people, which means I've got to explain them and understand they don't come from the same background and experience as I did.
Yeah.
So I think this idea of, and I think you talk about this a lot, the beginner's mindset is understanding this idea that most people are at the beginner's mindset. A jury's at the beginner's mindset. I can't skip a lot of these steps. And so that's why the practice is so important too, to make sure everything resonates and I get maximum value out of every single word that I deliver to them.
Yeah. Yeah. That feedback is so valuable to help you fill in the gaps, not in your own mind, but the gaps in other people's minds. So you know what points to hit. And anybody really could be the perfect avatar for a jury of your peers, right? That's the beauty of it as well. Okay, so there were two aspects you brought up at the beginning as well, was the people element, which I think that's a very good practice regime for that. You also mentioned like you need knowledge of the law. Now that's obviously this massive body of work with, ever growing, just cases and cases and cases. What was your approach to learning that? You can't possibly learn it all, right?
No, you can't, but you start picking up patterns, and that's why you get better over time, because you've seen so many of the patterns before. You understand the law. You can recall, like, I saw this previously and had this happen, so I know what's going on here. You just get more and more comfortable, and that's why it takes time to really become a great trial lawyer. Like, there's no way I would say in my first 30, 40 trials, I was a great trial lawyer. I just wasn't. You can't be. You can have all the right skill set, but you aren't a great trial lawyer because you don't have enough experience to know everything that's going to be thrown your way. So it just takes time, and you build that knowledge of the law over that time. It's not something that just happens magically. You take the bar and then you know all the law. That's absolutely wrong. It takes so much time. I had books that I would read, and it was just a code book. The code is the Code of Criminal Procedure. All the laws are written in what we call the code, different codes. And I would take them and just read them. Every year I would just read through them. And it is as boring as you can imagine. But you just read them because you start to figure out, like, that way it's at least in your head. So when something happens, you're like, oh, I've seen that. I've read that. I know a little bit about this. I know where to go find the answer. Yeah. And then over time, you just get more and more comfortable. And in fact, sometimes you actually have to be aware that as you get to know it better, you sometimes are able to manipulate it in a way that is actually harmful to your case. So I'll give a quick example. I had a case where I was in front of a judge who, very long-serving judge, was a former district attorney, very well known. She sat on a couple really high-profile trials here in Dallas. And I was trying a child abuse case in front of her a couple weeks after a very high-profile case here in Dallas. So she's very well known, knows the law, very smart woman, great judge. And something came up in trial, and I tried to get a piece of evidence in by interpreting part of the code in a specific way. And I sold her on that I was right. And she believed me. And she was like, well, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, you can enter it into evidence. And I had to actually go back and dive in deeper, because I was like, this feels too easy. This feels like if this was the case, we'd be doing it every single time. And I had never done this before, but I had found a way to basically use different parts to say, this points to this points to this, and this means we get to actually put this into evidence. I was like, I surely can't be the first person to figure this out. But she believed me. And I had to actually walk it back. When we came back from break, I had to approach her and say, Judge, I was actually wrong. You were right. This should not come into evidence, because if it does, the case will be appealed and will get overturned on appeal for entering in something improperly. So I actually had to walk it back. So as you get really good with it, you almost have to watch yourself against using it to your advantage that can actually hurt you. So it's this weird kind of dynamic of understanding the law, but it takes a long time. That was towards the end of my career as a district attorney, but you just start figuring all these pieces out. And then it's almost like being a conductor and just playing like with a symphony, and you're moving all these pieces around and you can use one to set up the other, to set up the other, to set up the other. And all of a sudden you're down this rabbit hole. It's a crazy world.
That's a great analogy, the conductor playing a symphony. So the thing, everything you've been talking about is mental representations, right? And that you've got this mental representation of the law and you know how to manipulate it. And you also talked about how once you know the rules, you can then know how to break them or bend them in your favor. If I talked about this a lot in episode 1 with Paul. So anybody listening wants to dive deeper into that as well, definitely check out that episode. So this concept of mental representation is fascinating, and that's really what I want to drill into now, like how you built those up, because that's what the great chess players who can just look at a board and know the next move. For a novice, that looks like the most impossible thing, but for them, there only are 2 or 3 possible moves when they see that exact representation, right? So it's not like there's this massive computing that's going on, because that's all there imprinted. And they've built that up over time. I think that's a really good point you make. This, like most things, just take time. So at what point did you make the commitment to put in this time?
It's a good question. I would say probably a year in to being a trial attorney. I don't think I did in the first year. I think in the first year, I was still arrogant.
How many cases is this, roughly?
20-ish cases at that point.
Yeah.
I think I was arrogant in the first year, where I thought I came from this background of being a college baseball player. I'd always been competitive. I'd always won. I went to a good undergrad. I went to a good law school. I was on the national mock trial team from the very first moment I tried out. I took a starting spot from older people. I think it was just straight up arrogance that I had in my first year, where I thought I know better. I don't need to learn from people. I don't need to put in the time. I know how to try a case. I've done this a bunch in the fake world. I'm better than the people I'm watching, and didn't put in the time that was necessary, which will not shock anybody, but my results reflected that. The results showed that I was not putting in the time. I mean, I wasn't doing poorly, right? I was winning more cases than I was losing, which at that point was still impressive for those prosecutors in that office. But it wasn't impressive to me. I was losing more cases than I thought I should be. And there's one that really stood out to me. I think, Andrew, this is kind of where I started to reevaluate my entire approach to how to speak to people and how to make that connection. Was I was trying a DWI case. And when you start out as a trial attorney, most of your cases are kind of normal driving while intoxicated cases here in Dallas. And I was trying it, and they had a blood test. It was like a 0.12. The legal limit is 0.08. There's no reason we should have lost. There were no bad facts for us, except the defendant was a 24-year-old male. He was very nice, very cooperative, did everything they asked, was well put together, just did everything you would want somebody in that situation to do. He obviously had made a mistake, did something dumb that he shouldn't have done. He testified at trial, again, very respectful, very nice, came across credible. But still, I had the law and the facts on my side. He was above a 0.08. There was no way to get it below that. He was guilty. Like, by what the law says, there was no way he could be found not guilty. The jury went out and deliberated, and I argued this, right? Normal stuff. Hey, he's above a 0.08. No way he gets below that. You have one job to do. It's to go find him guilty, go do it. Jury deliberated for about 30 minutes, came back. I'm expecting my guilty verdict because there's no reason I shouldn't be getting this. And at that point, again, this is where the arrogance comes in. I felt entitled to it. It was like, I put up the case. The law says he's guilty. You should give me what I deserve. And the foreperson stood up and immediately announced not guilty. And I was shell-shocked. But the real moment that showed me I needed to change my approach was I walked out into the hallway, and the jury was actually talking to the defendant after we had spoken to them. And they did the normal thing when we spoke to them when they come back with not guilty. Well, you did a good job, but we just thought maybe there wasn't enough evidence there, so we had to find him not guilty because it wasn't beyond a reasonable doubt.
Mm-hmm.
But they were talking to the defendant afterwards, and I was listening because I was curious. And there's no reason I can't listen at this point. And they tell him, sir, we know that you messed up, and we gave you a break here, so just make sure that you don't do it again. And I remember hearing that and just thinking to myself, oh, so like they agreed with me that I was right,
Yeah.
that I had proven it, but they liked him better than they liked me. And so they were willing to give him a break.
Yeah.
And that was the moment I realized it's not the logic, it's not the reason that convinces people, that sells these ideas. They were emotionally attached to him, and they were not emotionally attached to me, which meant they did what they thought was right based on their emotion. And they backed it up with the reasoning of, we're going to give you a break. But from that moment on, I changed my approach, and it was just off to the races, where there were very few cases that were lost over the next about 80 cases, just because I understood how to connect emotionally and started really digging into that. That's really kind of the genesis of what I would say performance speaking kind of came out of.
Yeah, the age of persuasion.